We'll get to libertarian political philosophy in a minute, well, in about 30 minutes. But is there a moral equivalence to needing your body to live and giving permission to have it used for this purpose? That's my thought, by the way, if you've got notes and you're noting that. Is there a difference between hooking you up to a violinist and a fetus needing your body to survive for 9 months? She's trying to make a moral equivalence here. I don't know if there's really a moral equivalence here. It's hard to get pregnant without knowing it. Aristotelian ethics. But if they kidnap you and drug you and you wake up the next morning and you're hooked up to the violinist, well, that's interesting. Can those who oppose abortion make an exception for a pregnancy due to rape or incest in order to save the mother's life from a critical medical and mental condition? Does not the mother's right to life ever outweigh the fetus's right to life? The right to life argument says no for the following reason. Performing the abortion would be directly killing a child, whereas doing nothing would not be killing the mother, only letting her die. So here we're now going to convolute the whole discussion. If you terminate the fetus to preserve the life of the mother, then obviously the fetus is going to die. If you do nothing, this is going to get us to the euthanasia argument. Voluntary active euthanasia. Passive voluntary euthanasia means I don't want any help, just let me die. We're going to let nature do the deed. So if the woman does nothing and ends up dying as a result of it, well, the baby didn't kill her, nature did. There's the full flaw in the argument. But what does this have to do with the violinist? See, in the one you know you're pregnant, and the other, and you have to deal with the fact that you have a critter in you. I hope that doesn't offend too many people, but I want to kind of make the language, because then you get into the language argument. I have to think about them out there. I can explain it to you, as opposed to suddenly finding yourself hooked up to the violinist. So she's trying to get around the argument by saying, well, the right to life of the fetus is more important to the woman because the fetus isn't killing the woman, even if the woman dies in the process. A counter-argument would be as follows. It cannot seriously be thought to be murder if the mother performs an abortion on herself in order to save her own life, ectopic pregnancy. It cannot seriously be said that she must refrain, that she must sit passively by and wait for her death. Neither can it be said that a third party must be excluded from performing the abortion in order to save the mother's life. A child needing medical attention in order to seek its life certainly can receive medical services from a physician. Therefore, a woman needing medical services, an abortion in order to save her life, should have granted the same rights as the child in need of medical services in order to save its life. So she's making a variety of arguments here, or at least presentations of how you might be able to justify the woman's right to life overrides the fetus's right to life. Even though without the woman's body, the fetus cannot survive. The woman can survive without the fetus cannot survive without the woman. Who has the greater right to life? More importantly, if you terminate the fetus, is that a just killing or an unjust killing? That's the real point she's trying to make. If you have a priority of what we call a lexical order, a hierarchical order of whose right to life should morally prevail, she's saying in almost all instances it should be the mother's right to life. Okay? We should now, at long last, ask what it means to have a right to life. In some views, having a right to life includes having a right to be given at least the bare minimum one needs for continued life, but considers this. Let's say I'm deathly sick, and the only life that can save me is the cool hand touch of Henry Fonda's hand, an old American actor. If he'll just touch my fevered brow, I'll be healed. Okay, so let's just say that's fact. Only Henry Fonda's cool touch on my brow can save my life. Do I have any right to life that he has to touch me on the head with his cool hand? No. It would be nice if he did. Just like it would be nice if you loaned yourself to the violinist for 9 months. But do I have a right to expect assistance in order to preserve my life? It should make it an obvious argument. Of course not. In the same way, the fact that the violinist needs to be continued use of your kidneys does not establish that he has a right to be given continued use, in other words, a right to life. Since you have not given him the right to use your kidneys, his presence is nothing more than an imposition on you without your consent. Therefore, would you not have a right to disconnect him and take your body back for its own use? Obviously, he would die, but the important question to ask is this: would this be an unjust killing? Now, this is not in the sense of murder, where you do this out of malice. It's out of life preservation.
I have a question. Would being an organ donor kind of screw the whole little scenario up?
In what regard? In what regard?
Well, you're saying like the dude doesn't have to touch his forehead, but what if he just signed up for that? Like he kind of has to at that point take it back.
Why couldn't he take it back?
You can't take it back after you like accept that you could.
Well, sure you can.
Yeah, after a certain
I can be a surrogate.
At the point, like when they're asking for your organ.
No, you can take it right to court. I can be a surrogate woman, accept someone else's child, and then not give it up. You go to court and argue about it, but I have the right to try and void the contract. Always. Not necessarily successful, but I have the right, even though I've agreed to it.
Okay, well that's what I'm getting at. It's like, if there's like an agreement when you
Yeah, there's an agreement. Yeah, I know. I hear there's an agreement to do that, and suddenly someone breaks the bonds of the contract. What happens? We talked about this in the adversarial system of justice. What happens when someone breaks the bonds of a contract? You take them to court, and there's a winner and there's a loser. And the obvious winner is not always the obvious winner, and the obvious loser is not always the obvious loser. It's a good point, but it goes back to, and we'll get back to libertarian freedom in a little bit at the end of the discussion. So this woman then, according to Judith Thompson, is exercising her libertarian rights to self-preservation. She doesn't have to give her body up to use. It would be nice. Henry Fonda would be nice. But there's no compulsion under the circumstances that she's describing. Everybody follow? Here, Judith Thompson is only arguing having a right to life does not guarantee having a right to be given the use of or right to be allowed the continued use of another person's body, even if one needs life itself. Now, what's the disconnect in this entire argument? We're talking about someone with a fevered brow who needs assistance, or someone with bad kidneys who needs assistance. These are people who can choose to seek assistance or not, or to assist you or not. Is that morally equivalent to a fetus? Does the fetus have a choice? No. So we're making a comparison that has some logical relevancy to it. We see that. But again, we have to examine it to the depth. And the analogy falls apart in these circumstances, because what sets up the analogy, the right to choose, both on the woman's part or on the donor's part, does not follow through when it comes to a fetus that's in a person's body. It is by no means enough to show the fetus as a person and to remind us that all persons have a right to life. We need to be shown also that killing the fetus violates the right to life. In other words, that abortion is an unjust killing. So here's the two things you're going to get tested on. Right to life, what does she mean by that? Unjust killing, what does she mean by that? Right? If you have a right to life, then to terminate your life would be an unjust killing. If you don't have a right to life, because now we have two conflicting values here. We have a person and we have a fetus, or we have the violinist, or we have Henry Fonda. If I choose not to, is that unjust, even though you're going to die with the fevered brow, or the violinist is going to die of kidney failure? Am I justified in refusing to help you, and is that death then an unjust killing? And she's going to say no. But is there a case when you terminate a fetus, and that is an unjust killing, that it does have a right to life, and that life requires the use of your body? You see the dichotomy we're drawing here? Okay. Now, she draws another analogy, and this one's even more interesting. Suppose a woman voluntarily indulges in protected intercourse, knowing there's a chance that it will result in pregnancy, and then she does become pregnant. Is she not in part responsible for the presence, in fact, the very existence of the unborn person inside her? And wouldn't the unborn then have a right to use her body under those circumstances? Well, every contraception has a point of vulnerability. You realize if you don't take the pill the way it's supposed to be taken, you get pregnant. Or if you use protected sex, IUDs aren't completely safe, prophylactics aren't completely, there's always a little window of vulnerability, and if you use it, you have to know that. And if the window of vulnerability appears and you become pregnant, Judith Thompson's asking, well, you knew, and so now aren't you responsible for giving it a right to life? It wasn't a surprise, Well, yeah, you get surprised because you don't expect it, but you knew there was that expectation and possibility no matter how small the window is. Well, that becomes a reasonable argument until she does this. No doubt she didn't invite it in, but doesn't her partial responsibility for its being there give it a right to use her body? This is called minimally decent Samaritanism. According to this, Ms. Thompson, aborting a fetus in order to avoid postponing a trip abroad would not be morally acceptable. But the case you just presented isn't, okay, so I'm pregnant 8 months and I want to go on a trip, so. She's saying you have consensual intercourse and the little window of vulnerability opens and, oops, I knew this might happen and now I'm pregnant. You see the difference between choosing to abort in order to enjoy something and having intercourse and not expecting the result, but it happens anyway, Jada?
This is just a thought, but if the egg isn't viable until it gets the sperm, right? The sperm only can come from the male or it implanted in her. Wouldn't the person supplying the fertilization have a choice too? Well, I don't want my sperm to be used to make babies.
If you don't put it in the right position, it can't. Aristotelian ethics. Or I shouldn't say ethics, but...
Wouldn't have the issue of the woman's right. Doesn't the man have a right to decide if he wants to pay for his sperm?
That's different than depositing. Once it's deposited, then we have the legal argument, who has the greater right, and the laws always come down on the side of the woman. You can make the argument, and we do make that when it comes to custody or what do you call when you make payment?
Wouldn't that leave,
Child support.
wouldn't that leave room for him saying, I do want my sperm?
And forcing the woman to have the baby. And that then becomes that becomes a matter of legal priority, and the woman will always, for now, will always have legal priority over that.
So let's say hypothetically what she's saying is if the woman is in perfect health and there's no medical or mental reason for her to avoid the child, then the fetus's right to life exceeds her right to life?
Well, she's making an argument both ways. She's presenting it like that, but then she's finding counter arguments for why it should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, she's trying to satisfy an argument. It's an interesting argument, but you see the contra of some of her arguments. Go ahead.
She's just providing counter arguments so that she can argue her claim better. And just like she's throwing every argument she possibly has at her.
Yeah.
And they're reasonable arguments, sort of. So you get pregnant and there's a small window of vulnerability. You didn't invite it in. So she says, well, okay, how about this? How about you put bars on the window of your apartment to keep out thieves? And unbeknownst to you, there's a flaw in one of the bars. And the thief doesn't know that, but he comes up and he's testing all the bars and all the you guys, I grew up in New York City. We have fire escapes on the outside. Yeah. And so he comes up and, whoo, and it comes right out and he comes in. Should he be allowed to stay there? No, of course not. Are you kidding me? Okay, fine. Because there was no intent to invite him in. Even though we know that there can be flaws in anything that's mechanically produced, like steel and bars. So she goes even further. She says, let's say you put a screen system in, and unbeknownst to you, there's a little hole in the screen, and a little seed happens to be blown in, and it lands in the carpet, and of course carpets are dirty even when we clean them, and it takes root and it starts to grow up. Does that plant have the right to use your carpet in your apartment to grow up to the fullness of what it can be because there was a flaw in the screen that you